Converted Man here. Welcome to my debate with Armored Skeptic. We have agreed to the following format: 15 minutes for our arguments, not including time used for opening remarks, 2 rounds of 10-minute rebuttals, and a 10-minute ending argument and closing statements. I personally am going to answer any questions asked to me in text comments on either of our videos to the best of my abilities after the full debate is over. But it's not part of the debate proper, and Armored Skeptic is free to answer or not answer questions directed to him as he sees fit. The definitions for the words in our question are in the box below this video. We both agreed to use Oxford Dictionary's website to define these words. I've also included some text notes in the description box below to help further educate the audience and my opponent on debate's functionality, this debate in specific, and it is purely there for educational purposes. It's not part of the actual debate. The question of the debate is as follows: is it reasonable to conclude that a supernatural creator exists? Using the agreed upon definitions, this question can be phrased thus: can someone use sound judgment, a considered decision, to arrive by reasoning that a force beyond scientific understanding that is a person or thing has objective being? My answer to this question is no, and my focus will be on the issue of supernatural being a thing at all. I submit that the supernatural cannot be something reasonable due to the very nature of what it purports to be. When we look at the word magic at Oxford, we get the following: the power of apparently influencing the course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. Note the later part. Magic is using the supernatural, and the supernatural is anything beyond scientific understanding. Science studies everything possible for it to study. If we propose something that science can't study, then in essence we're saying that there is something that can't be studied, but somehow we know about it anyway. This is akin to declaring that magic is real, and some say it is. If there is something more, I think we would be able to find it, measure it, know about it, test it, study it, and so on. If we never find it, then so be it, as it would not be something we could ever know anything about. David Copperfield is a master illusionist. He does tricks, not magic. Some of his illusions might look like magic, but they're not. He has flown, walked through the Great Wall, made the Statue of Liberty vanish, and other impressive things. Yet, none of it is real magic. Most of his tricks can be figured out by anyone who desires to do so. Flying, even when there seems to be no rigs around, is probably done with rigs and very thin wires. Lots of rigs that are simply hidden very well. In the audience angle and the camera angles are all put in such a way that they just can't see how he's doing it. In the theater, when he flies around with the audience, there's plenty of places to hide wires to be suspended. Now, I propose an idea. If David Copperfield declared that it was magic or the supernatural that was giving him the ability to fly, we can't ever test it. Clearly, we want him to fly in a controlled area, but he might claim that flight only works under certain ways, or that the instruments make it so he can't fly. Magic and the supernatural are only real when no one can study them through the lens of science. Perhaps this is why the James Randi $1 million prize has still gone unclaimed for so long. We cannot prove a negative, which means we cannot ever prove that it is not magic or the supernatural that allows David Copperfield to do his tricks. But we don't have to, for it's simply unreasonable to believe that it is magic or the supernatural unless we can somehow prove that those things are a thing at all. We can also give good examples of how the tricks might be done, constructing models and the like. We can show how the supernatural or magic is not necessary for him to do these things. Yet, Someone who wants to believe that David Copperfield is magic, nobody and nothing could convince them that he wasn't. In fact, there's a story that David himself told about a man who came up to him wanting him to heal his sick son. He told him he couldn't do anything for him. The man offered him literally every single penny he had. David Copperfield continued to say he didn't have magic, he couldn't do anything, but the man believed that he could do something for his son, even though David himself said he could not. For the true believer, evidence, facts, reason, and logic hold no sway. I submit we could not call that man reasonable for believing that David could help his son. I automatically have no empirical evidence or repeatable tests for the supernatural by its very definition. I could then only turn to a logical argument of some sort to at least give me logical reasons to think that it's true. However, even if I did have such an argument, I wouldn't have proof. I could show perhaps it's reasonable, since I have a logical argument for it, but I wouldn't have proof for it. It is my opponent's full burden to give that logical argument, and if not, then we have nothing to go on at all. We have magic. No test, no proof, no logic, no reason. One cannot simply assert things as existing or being and give no argument for them. Well, of course some people do, but it's not within the scope of logic or reason. So if there are any fallacies in my opponent's argument, then we must conclude that it is not reasonable to accept his conclusion. All I have said here in my opening statements is going to be summarized in my actual argument. When my opponent rebuttals, he should focus solely on the premises to show that they are in error in some logical way. If he cannot do that, then he has to argue against the conclusion in some way. And if he cannot do that, then my argument, if logical, should convince the audience to be skeptical of his conclusions and not skeptical of mine. For this argument, EE will stand for empirical evidence, RT will stand for repeatable test, and LCA will stand for logically coherent argument. My argument is thus. Premise 1. The supernatural is defined as beyond science's ability to study or know. Premise 2. This removes the supernatural automatically from having empirical evidence or repeatable tests for it by the very definition of the word itself. Premise 3. The word reasonable, as agreed upon in our definition, is voided unless we have EE or RT or an LCA. Premise 4. We cannot have EE or RT for anything supernatural, as in Premise 2. Premise 5. If we do not have an LCA for the supernatural, then it cannot be reasonable to include it as any conclusion. Premise 6. We most likely do not have a LCA for the supernatural. Conclusion. We cannot conclude, using reason, that the supernatural can be and or is a thing. Thus, the question of is it reasonable to conclude that a supernatural creator exists would have to be no. This concludes my primary argument for this debate.